Rev up your engines! For anybody who's ever owned one of these Savannah vans for any length of time, they know they were poorly made. They have all kinds of problems. They had brake rotors that would even prematurely crack. Now, they've been using brake rotors for a long time. Again, with GM, they're just making them too cheap, and they're cracking, and they're having braking problems. Serious stuff if you got a cargo van loaded with cargo. If you want to do a little research yourself, if you don't believe old Scotty here, do research on all the recalls that these Savannah vans have had, these cargo vans. And you're going to be amazed at all the recalls they have. And recalls, of course, are forced by the government. Only when enough people complain, they look into it, and they got a lot more problems than just these recalls. But the large list of recalls in and of themselves are telling you these are not well-made cargo vans. The power steering systems had problems with the lines separating, spraying fluid all over the place, which of course is a fire hazard. They have problems with the power steering hydraulic pumps not working right. The shaft's having problems. Now let's face it, power steering has been around a really long time. The whole idea behind it is relatively simple. You got a pump that runs off a fan belt, builds up a lot of pressure, up to like 1500 psi pressure, pushes that high pressure fluid to the power steering rack, which then pushes hard when you turn one way or the other. The only reason they're having problems is because they're making them too cheap. They're trying to save money using inferior products, inferior manufacturing techniques. Then they come and bite you in the rear end if you buy one. I've worked on them. They often turn into electrical nightmares. All the stuff like the power locks start to break because they got cheaper wiring and they're open to corrosion. Things that, hey, shouldn't be happening. They've been making vehicles long enough that you think, but no. The electronics wear out, they're too subject to corrosion, stuff that could easily be prevented. They built them right in the first place. And one of my favorite repairs that I had to often do, they don't have the greatest working room either for working on, is these things are notorious for developing intake gasket leaks. So water and oil mixes, which of course can destroy an engine. Now in most cases, when you get oil and coolant mix, it's the head gasket leaking, which is what most mechanics are going to look for. But in this case, it's the intake manifold gasket assembly that leaks. And again, they've been making intake manifolds and gaskets on engines since Model T Fords. You'd think they'd be able to design one correctly. Through the use of all these plastic parts to make them cheaper, they have more problems with things leaking because of the difference in the thermal expansion and contraction of plastic and metal. Somehow they haven't been able to figure out how to make plastic engine heads because the pistons are going up and down inside and the valves are in the head opening and closing made out of metal. They'd make them out of plastic if they could. I read they even tried, but of course they melt and they crack. So they're still making the heads out of metal. But if you got a plastic intake manifold bolted on top and your engineers don't know what they're doing, as the plastic expands and contracts differently than the metal, the gaskets go bad. And that's the problem they have with these. Not a cheap fix, especially if you don't notice it and you get too much water in your oil and it ruins the bearings in the engine. Then you need the whole engine rebuilt, not just an intake manifold gasket. You want a solid, reliable work machine. You don't want something that falls apart before its time. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.